Hello.
Hello, everybody. How's it going? Thank you for joining me and Craig for the next 45 minutes as we talk shop and dive into some hot topics around agencies. So, my name's Bret Swain, and I lead the solutions consulting team with Parallax. I've not by design, but I've become a little bit of an agency operations nerd. I've been consulting with agencies and other professional services organizations for 6 years now just to help them dial in their ops and get a better handle on their business. For Craig's intro, we're going to try something a little bit different. One, I think this is a great way to really get to know Craig. Plus, I'm also one of those horrible people that loves my own jokes. And so this is a good opportunity for to make everybody consume my joke for at least a solid 5 minutes. This is also going to be one of the more interactive parts of the session. So we're going to play a game called Fact or Fiction. And this is from a LinkedIn post I posted yesterday. And some of the detail around Craig's intro is fact and some of it's fiction. So we're going to go through this line by line and we're going to ask the audience to take a guess on whether or not each item is fact or fiction. And then Craig is going to jump in and give us some context and tell us which of us were right and which of us were wrong. So the first item is starting with business. At 26, Craig Rodney built one of Africa's top social media agencies and sold it to WPP. Audience, do we think that's fact or fiction?
How long do I have to jump in? I think we can do a quick
Yeah.
fire.
So we
I
got,
think
let's,
that this one would needs qualifying though, because at
okay.
26 I started the agency, and at 40 I sold it. So it's a broader range question. It didn't happen at the age of 26, but it started then.
Okay. All right. So I see one person guessing fact. Any other guesses? All right. Another fact. Craig gave the first one away. This is a bit of a layup to start us off. All right, Craig. So yeah, so maybe tell us your story. What was that experience like? Starting the agency and then eventually selling it.
It was wild. It was absolutely wild. It started off very slowly. I started based almost purely on arrogance. I was working at an agency and knew I could do it better. So at 26, full of bravado, I went and started my agency. And the first year was hell. I struggled really badly, but then it started winning clients, and it went from there. And I was stuck at a small agency for about 8 years. Just couldn't escape being small. There was like five of us, and then eventually figured it out, and it just went exponential. Within kind of 2 or 3 years, we'd grown big enough that we'd attracted the attention of the big kind of marketing groups, and we eventually sold to WPP at the end of 2013, and then I left at the end of 2016.
All right. So I think one question that popped into my mind, I think selling a company is obviously really exciting and it's allowed you to do and focus on some of the hobbies that we're going to get into in a minute here. Were there times throughout that process where maybe you had some regret and you didn't feel like selling it was the right move, or were you always confident that was the direction you wanted to go?
I was confident. My business partner had regret. Like, we spoke about it quite a bit afterwards. The truth is, financially, you stand to make more money keeping an agency than by selling it, because just from a length of period of time. So if the business is profitable and if it's healthy, and as long as it's not destroying your life, like, you'll make more money keeping it. For me, I knew I wanted to go do something else. I'd been doing it for 15 years. My mental health was not great. I was struggling. The pressure got to me. And in hindsight, it ended up being a brilliant decision strategically. It bore out to be the correct decision. I didn't miss it that much. My business partner did. So it's interesting. It shows that it's more of a personal, it depends on who you are and your relationship with the business. As I said, I was quite happy. I was quite happy to have sold and left.
Okay. That is interesting how just based on your personality and probably where you were in life, both you and your partner had a different take on the scenario. All right. Oh,
And I was a bit older than him, and my eldest son was born in the same week that we did the deal. And so
okay.
it's like this
Whoa.
pivoting life. It was like a point in my life where I became a dad and I wanted to spend more time at home and that kind of stuff. So it all coincided nicely for me.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. All right. And so now you spend your time coaching agency leaders. but we shouldn't call you a consultant. Can you give us a little bit more context on
No,
what you're doing now
don't call it.
and why you despise that term?
So I don't think I despise it as much as it's just the incorrect term. Consultants do work. My ambition is not to do work. And again, that sounds arrogant, but my coaching career started when I was approached by a few agencies asking me to go in and help them. And I got offered a few jobs that were very grateful for the offers, but I didn't want to work in agencies anymore. So it started by me just saying to the agency owners, citizen, I don't want to do the work, but I'll happily tell you what you need to do. So my positioning became as a coach. It's almost like a sports coach who's been played at the highest levels of the game for 15 years, but my knees are shot. I don't have the health rate to be able to run on the field anymore. But we'll do coaching sessions, but when the whistle blows, you're running on that field alone. And it's the correct approach. I don't think a business coach should be a crutch into an agency. Consultants are by design. You can bring in consultants that operate as a crutch, as a support structure, but a coach is not supposed to be a crutch. It's supposed to make you better at your job. And eventually you might not need a coach. You should be able to be good enough to run your agency.
Yeah. And I thought that when we first met, I thought that differentiation was so interesting. It also makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of consultants in this space. And for a lot of people running and operating an agency, a consultant totally makes sense. Somebody that's going to jump into their business, do a deep dive, get into the nitty gritty. Where I remember you told me you were like, a consultant's generally looking for more problems to solve, where you know you're doing your job right if you can get out of there quicker, because that means that you've done a good job coaching and now your players can handle the game on their own. So I thought that was an interesting differentiation. And so here's a couple of personal ones. So I'm going to combine two and we're going to move back to this fact or fiction game. He's never found a wave too big to surf, and he has a pet great white shark named Stock. So maybe punch into the chat whether or not you think that those are fact or fiction. And we'll give it about 20 seconds.
Go for it.
Fiction. Okay, so at least one person thinks that you're afraid of big waves, is what I'm getting here.
Mark, you know nothing about me.
Yes. Okay, we got a few facts. Mark's laughing. All right, but yeah, so Craig, tell us. I know we talked about some of your hobbies. What's your relationship with surfing in the water?
I would spend as much time in the water as I possibly could. Big waves don't really scare me. Doesn't mean I'm capable of surfing them. I spend a lot of time falling off of big waves, but they
Yeah.
don't scare me. I love big waves. I don't have a pet shark though. I've encountered a few sharks, but I don't have any as pets.
I thought I saw on your GQ write-up that you had a pet shark named Doc, but maybe I missed that.
Yeah, no, I think that's someone else making up fiction about me.
Okay, and the last one before we start to dive into the nitty-gritty, you're also a big golfer. Have you ever bogeyed a hole?
Loads of holes, loads of bogeys,
But
loads.
probably no
But
double
it's
bogeys or triple bogeys though, right?
no, double bogeys are for amateurs and people who don't take it seriously.
Yep. All right. Anything else, Craig, that you want to add about your experience before we jump in?
No, I think the main thing is I absolutely love what I do now. I loved running an agency. Like I really did. I embraced it and it was great. It was really hard work. And I suffered pretty much every imaginable issue that agency owners can suffer over my career. And I love doing the coaching. And it's because I have a high degree of empathy and understanding for where people are with their agencies. And I know exactly how and why people get stuck. And I know what it feels like to be there, but I also know how amazing it can be when you get unstuck. And that's the source of my desire to add value as a coach. And I think that's important.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And maybe last thing before we jump in, we'd mentioned that we're going to be talking real strategies for breaking through the growth ceiling, which you just alluded to, building a sustainable business, and then also getting out of reactive mode. Can you just give a quick summary of maybe the topics that you're going to cover and maybe what the key 1 to 2 takeaways that you want the audience to have as they walk away from this?
So I think the primary one is to develop a second view of of what you sell. And it's important to have the one view, which is, oh, we sell creativity or we sell email marketing or paid media. And we tend to have a list of descriptions of what we sell on our websites. And I want you to add an additional view that is slightly different, which is we sell stock. and get an understanding of what your stock is and start implementing systems and measurements into the business that a normal stock-based business would use, stock controls, all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of agencies are started by creative people, agency people who are really good at delivering these services. But if you want it to be a great business, you need to be able to look at it as a business, which is somewhat discounting the actual services that you do and looking at it as a business and go, this is what we buy, this is what we sell, this is how we market up, all that kind of stuff. I think that's critical to get that right.
Yeah. And then maybe what would be takeaway number two before we dive into the detail?
The second takeaway is you have to invest like significantly. You have to invest time-wise and you have to invest financially in getting the correct information and getting the data that you need to be able to make these decisions in your business. It's if you're a tiny agency, you can go on gut. I'll never criticize you from going on gut. But if you want any level of growth and any level of scale, you have to take this seriously. And what I mean by seriously is you have to budget for it. You have to go, what technology, what systems, what people, what insights, what learning do I need to develop to be able to get control over the profitability and the kind of the resources in the agency. And you can't scale guesswork is the second takeaway.
Okay. All right. So I think that first one you mentioned is stock. And I feel like you have a really unique perspective on this. Can you go into a little bit more detail of what you mean by stock and how the audience should think about stock as it relates to their business?
Cool. So I think it's important to understand where it came from me is I was never an agency person. I studied economics. And so when I started an agency, I had only had a few months agency experience. And for me, it just made natural sense to have a model for what we were doing. And it's widely lacking in agencies, which I guess underpins my career as an agency coach. So it's good. But almost the beginning point for all of my coaching is to help people understand that they buy and sell units of time. When you hire someone, you're prepaying for a bulk set of 1 hour units of time, and the business model is selling that time on to clients at a markup. And that's it. That's the business model. What you do with that time is far less important. Understanding that you have stock. The same if you ran a shoe store, you would have to have stock controls. You would know how much stock was on the floor. You know how much stock you had sold. You do a stock take at the end of the month, and you go, we started with this much, we have this much left, and this is our sales. And the difference between all of those numbers is your stock loss. And in agencies, you can and must do the exact same thing. So I always try and give people this analogy of if you imagine at the beginning of the month, you open the doors and you've got a warehouse full of stock, and each employee represents a shelf of boxes representing 1 hour of design, 1 hour of strategy, 1 hour of paid media, whatever it is, right? If it's a full-time employee, I generally go on the rule of 126 boxes. So 6 hours a day times 21 working days in a month. And so each employee has 126 boxes. On the side of the box is the employee's name. It has what that box is. It's 1 hour mid-level graphic design, and it has a recommended retail price. And your job is to sell all of those boxes. And your job is to sell them all at the recommended retail price, or as close to that as you can get. And if you get that, then you're pretty close to printing money if you can get that right. The problem with the stock, though, is in agencies, there's two big problems. The first one is that it's fragile. So we have an incredibly fragile stock. We have stock that gets sick. We have stock that takes leave. We have stock that sometimes underperforms. We have stock that sometimes overperforms. So there's a level of fragility in the stock that we have to manage and accept. But the biggest issue is it's perishable. Like it's time. You can't sell yesterday's stock. Once it's gone, it's never recoverable. And you and I spoke before about with hotels.
Yeah.
And I've done work with hotels, and it's fascinating. If you know anyone in the hotel industry, go and study how they manage occupancy. For hotels, occupancy is everything. And now with online tools, they will manipulate their rates on like a daily or hourly basis. They manipulate their rates based on their occupancy. So as rooms are selling, they increase the price, and if the demand drops too much, they bring the price down, etc. And their objective is to sell every room at the highest possible rate. And any room that goes unsold it's forever gone. You can never recover that room. You can't sell last night's hotel room, and you can't sell yesterday's hourly stock.
Yep.
And so essentially at the end of each month, your warehouse is empty. All that stock is gone. And the truth is, the business model, if you want to be successful, the business model is to get to the end of the month, know that all the stock is gone, and have sold as many out, have money in the bank representing as many of those hours as possible at the highest achievable rates.
Yep.
And if you aren't running the business that way, it's very difficult to improve efficiency. Most people try and increase revenue. They just go, let's just win more clients. And revenue, if you have, that's like a hotel with 50% occupancy going, you know what, let's go and get more customers at the wrong rates and give away more free rooms. And is you have to get the efficiency right before you pile on revenue.
Yeah. And I think again, I've been consulting with businesses for 6 years now, and there's a lot of metrics floating around. Obviously, revenue is one of them that comes to mind. The two that I always start with organizations that are looking to transform their operations are utilization and profitability. And so when I heard this, specifically the hotel analogy and occupancy, it feels perfect in terms of how it relates to the agency business and specifically the utilization number, right? Hotels are tracking probably their occupancy percent or number of rooms that are rented. And if they're not rented for a night, like it's gone. There's no real way to get that time back. And
Yep.
for team, like low utilization, it's the same concept. If you couldn't find work for a team member last month, there's no real way to get that back. So it's really important that you can look into the future, proactively see where you're going to have high occupancy so that you can start lowering rates, so you can start marketing more to basically increase your occupancy or increase your utilization. I think one thing that the audience might be wondering is that analogy makes perfect sense in a T&M world, right? But there are other billing models that some of our customers might be using or some attendees might be using, like a fixed fee engagement or a retainer style engagement. Like how does this analogy change or does it not change
Nothing.
based on the fixed?
Doesn't change.
Okay.
I have encountered the theoretical models where it wouldn't work, but I've never encountered a practical model that an agency is using that doesn't work, or that isn't directly applicable to this analogy. And it's because you still buy time. All of the different pricing models, value-based pricing, output-based pricing, as you said, time and material-based pricing, whatever pricing model you choose is a way of maximizing the return on your time, but you still bought time. Time is still your stock, right? And so no matter what happens, unless you're not buying time, unless you've got a product-based model, which fair enough, a lot of agencies have done that. We've created a service type product that people pay for, and it doesn't cost us time other than the initial setup capital. And again, that's great, but that's incredibly uncommon. For the most part, if you buy time, then you sell time. How you sell it, the models that you use to price it, to bundle it, to all that kind of stuff, brilliant. I will support you in any one of those that works. But you still buy time and you still sell time. And because of that, you still have to know how much you're buying, how much you're selling, what the markups are, what the utilization rates are, what the efficiency rates are. Employees, I think you have a responsibility to report to employees on how much money you collect against their time. Right? Like I think employees are way more effective when they know how many hours of their day is actually paid for and how many hours each client pays for. If a client
Yeah.
only pays for 2 hours of my time a day, if I don't know that, how do I know? How do I
Yeah.
know what service level to give, etc.? So as I said, if you're
I think,
productized,
yeah.
brilliant. But on the most part, if you buy and sell time, the model applies.
Yeah. And I think you made a good point because then another thing that we hear is okay, like utilization, that's a metric for management, right? Like that's not necessarily something that the individual contributors, the consultants, or the designers need to care about. But you made a good point in one of our conversations where you're like, the, like people on the ground want to know the value of their own work, and they want to know that the business is getting paid for it. And it sounds like maybe you have some personal experience with running into that situation.
Yeah, employees understand that their future promotions and their future salary increases are dependent on this business being successful. And the success on this business is dependent on the business being able to get paid for the time and the services that it delivers to the clients, right? And so employees are invested, whether consciously or subconsciously, they're invested in the agency being efficient at getting paid for the work that's done and for the hours that are delivered, because their future depends on that as well. The security of the agency overall, their promotions and their salary increases. So
Yeah.
when you involve them in the process, they generally adopt it and become kind of supporters of it. And you must remember, this is definitely not a foreign concept. There's nothing that I'm speaking about here that isn't the most common knowledge outside of marketing. If you go to a law firm, an intern at a law firm knows that their value to that firm is their billables, right? It's
Yep.
their number of hours that they can charge to a client multiplied by their hourly rate. And the better they can get, the higher rate they can charge, their billables go up. And eventually, if they do well enough over a number of years, they might make partner based on their financial contribution to that firm. In agency, we tend to create this divorce between, it's almost like a swear word when you talk to someone and go, your stock is time and we're going to sell your stock. I've done this talk and employees get super offended because I said that we should treat them like stock. And you're misunderstanding. If you were a lawyer, trust me, your value to this business is your billables. At
Yep.
least your financial value. I'm not, there's other values, but your financial value is your billable, and you shouldn't be offended by that.
Yeah.
So we have that as an issue.
Or
But yes,
or
yes,
in
carry on.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, or in a fixed fee model. Like even if you aren't billing for that specific time, it's the time that you're using to generate value for your customer. And and like businesses, even in that model, they want to make sure that even if you're even if you're spending your time and it's not T&M and it's not directly getting billed, that's still how the business makes money, is that time that you're spending, those hours that you're dedicating to supporting those customers that are in a fixed fee model or in a retainer model. And so it's still super important to your point that you're utilizing your stock or utilizing your team in an efficient way and you don't have waste. And you want to make sure that you can see that.
Yeah. There's a point worth making here, but it's not an avenue I necessarily want us to go down. But there's an ethical discussion here, because when we said earlier, you can't sell last month's time, there are agencies who do that. They will just make their employees work overtime. So on a fixed fee model, if you sold 100 hours and you realize that it's going to take 120 and you can't charge the client for it, you'll find a way to not pay for the 20 overrun as well.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter if you're not being paid, if you're not paying.
Yep.
And I said, I don't want us to go down that road, but I see it quite often that agencies, they pass the pain of being inefficient onto employees. Instead of absorbing it, they go, we're not going to measure this and we're not going to be in control of it. And we're not going to hold clients to scopes, because that's all very difficult stuff. It's not that difficult, but it's a painful stuff that
It
they've got to
requires
do.
uncomfortable
It's
conversation.
easier to, it's easier to
Yeah.
not do it and just pass the pain on to our employees, and we still protect our profit margin. And I have an issue with that, obviously. But I said that's the ethical side of that slightly
Yep. All
different
right. So
conversation.
And the good news is, so we also have a question in the Q&A. And even though we didn't preface this up front, please continue to pump these questions in. So anonymous attendee, whoever you are, thank you for the question. Craig, here it is. Related to this topic, how do you improve resourcing to optimize utilization? To elaborate on this, does one person own agency resourcing to ensure that we are avoiding bottlenecks and blockers to others achieving their utilization benchmarks?
I don't think one person owns it. I think everyone owns it. I think it is the performance of the business. You can't place the burden of performance of the business into one person, because they work against everyone else. So I fundamentally believe that all employees should have access to how much of their time gets purchased by every single client on every single project. I don't think an employee should start a piece of work without knowing how long they have to do it. I think an employee should know what their utilization rate is, what their billables are, what their wasted stock is, etc. I think employees should be treated maturely enough to be able to contribute to the conversation and the discourse around improving this. Because the moment an employee feels pain around their own utilization and they feel like their time's being wasted, they become a far more valuable contributor into removing bottlenecks and increasing efficiency and increasing transparency and that kind of stuff. So I think it is an everyone solution. Sure, at the end of the day, one person will ultimately be responsible for it. It's probably the managing director. Whoever's responsible for profit is responsible for utilization. It's as simple as that. But I don't think you can get it right without having everyone participating in getting it right, in contributing towards the data, in being honest in how they report on their time and all that kind of stuff. And the moment everyone is involved in it, you immediately have participants in the solution.
Got it. So I think now we've made the point that like no matter where you are in your growth, especially if you're looking to scale, especially if you're looking to become a more mature agency, it's important that you're taking inventory of where your team's spending their time and measuring that. You've coached a number of different agencies throughout your time. What do you see are some of the biggest causes for stock loss or low utilization? And then what are some of the remedies that you coached your leadership clients, your agency leadership clients on how to adapt and solve those challenges?
Okay. So yeah, so you brought in the term there, stock loss.
Yeah.
You guys use the framing utilization. There's not enough pain in the word utilization, right?
Yeah.
Like a 70% utilization doesn't sound anywhere near as painful as a 30% stock loss. As I said, if you ran a shoe store and you had 30% stock loss, you would want to know what's causing it and you would invest in reducing that stock loss. There's no ways you will carry on without fixing a 30% stock loss. But I can guarantee you almost every agency on this call is close to a 30% stock loss. It is so using the word loss is painful and it's done on purpose because it is a loss. The difference between the combined potential retail value of all of your stock. If you took every box in the warehouse at the beginning of the month and multiplied it by the recommended retail price, you'd get this is what perfection would look like if we sold every box at its highest potential rate. And you just compare that to your gross profit, how you actually did, and you'll have a stock loss. And the biggest if I put the encapsulating frame, is the biggest contributor is avoiding pain. I'm going to frame it, I'll get into the detail, but it's agency owners avoiding pain and they just take the pain in loss as opposed to confrontation. So it starts by discounting. The number one thing, and these all sound very similar because they all have the same result, but they're slightly different in technicality. So one is discounting, you send a quote to a customer and they're like, oh, we don't have that much money. Instead of 500K, we only got 400. And instead of removing 100K's worth of stock from the quote, you just come down in price. And the moment you discount that price, you're preventing that stock from ever being sold at its recommended retail price, which will result in a stock loss. Discounting is the first one. And then underscoping is the next one, where again, it's generally from this position of wanting to come in a bit cheaper and being afraid to put a big number in front of a client. So we tend to underscope. We don't secure enough budget to do the work correctly and the right amount of work. And so we panic and we go, you know what, let's just go in a little bit lower. So you may not discount the actual hourly rate, but you
Yeah.
don't quote for all of the work that's going to come up. And then all of that extra work has to be done for free.
And
The
there's a
Yeah.
question in the Q&A that relates to this. A Q&A is how do you manage client delays causing you to waste stock? For example, clients not delivering feedback on time. So in the example that you just highlighted, your team is underscoping, and that's causing your team to spend more time on that project, but you're not getting paid for a big portion of it because you scoped it wrong. In this case, it's a little bit different because it's not necessarily a challenge with how you scoped it. It's a challenge with the client living
Client
up to their
behavior.
end of the bargain. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all under the category of the client's behavior changes what you thought was going to happen and makes it more expensive, more painful. Again, you either have to step up and have direct communication with that client around how their behavior is impacting the budget. And often, I would often have to have conversations with clients, and you say, listen, this way of working or this behavior is using up too much budget from clients. We would have clients say, I want the entire team in the all hands agency meeting. So I've got 3 people in a 3 hour meeting once a week. And you're like, guys, and so I would just say, you're using too much of the budget in client management and you're taking it away. You're diminishing our opportunity to deliver in production or creative or something like that. So I would frame it as their budget categories competing against each other. But ultimately, you have to charge the client for that. It has to be the client's problem or the client's pain. And I'm sensitive to it because I also know that some clients can be super abusive and they're just like, if you don't humor me or if you don't pander to me, I'm going to change agencies, in which case I would absolutely respect you for just accepting that minor loss. But if we talk in a vacuum, like theoretically here, it should be a conversation with a client that says, hey, can we introduce some efficiencies here? Or can we speed this up? Or this is the impact of that behavior. How can we help you change the behavior? Or if you're comfortable, we don't mind offering this as a service, but it's going to cost a bit of extra money. Ultimately, again, it's you have to make that decision based on your gut feel. But if you're going for optimization, but again, you have to know this before you even get to make the decision.
Yeah.
So if to be fair to the person who asked the question, if you are aware of that level of over delivery and you're aware of the exact cause of it, you are in the 1%, the top 1% of agencies on the planet as far as your knowledge and insights. I would even forgive you for not doing anything just for the fact that you knew. That would be amazing.
Yeah. And so it sounds like in order to if you know that's a risk, in order to prevent that in the future, like some specific tactical things you could do is potentially negotiate that in the contract and highlight that, hey, these are the things that we expect of you, and there's going to be due dates associated with those. And if you don't get them done by these dates, then we're going to charge you for it. And then another tactic that you brought up is if they don't have the organization to PM it on their own, potentially that's another service that you provide, and you provide more project management support to help keep them on track. That one
Yeah,
doesn't.
and
Yeah.
they can either pay extra for it or it just comes out of the production budget, which is not great for the brand, right? Like
Yeah.
you want to keep as much budget available for producing outcomes as possible. That benefits the brand and you. So both of you should be incentivized to work as efficiently and cleanly as possible. But if the client wants things done their way in a specific way and it costs money, they should, in theory, they should pay for it. There's one really important note here, and it's not something you and I discussed before, but and I'm gonna flip through it very quickly. But I always say there's a difference between a consequence and a punishment. The action is the same. The difference is when you explain it. And so, as long as you explain to a client upfront, hey, if overruns happen, or if this happens, or if this happens, if you explain at the beginning of the relationship how you as an agency handle overruns, additional requests outside of scope things, if you explain upfront that we're happy, we accommodate that, and we will, but we bill for it, then it's a consequence. If you've never explained it and you then send an invoice, it's a punishment. And clients never like being punished, but for the most part, they're comfortable if you take the time to explain the consequences and then you're simply affecting a consequence, not punishing behavior.
I like that just flip in how it's framed. Okay, so now we've covered stock loss. Another interesting fact about Craig is he's a huge fan of gold mining. And it sounds like what the audience might not know is there's a very specific tie between gold mining and running an agency. Can you walk us through that?
Is the exact same business model. So I'm less obsessed with gold mining and I'm more obsessed with gold mining shows. Like, just I can't watch enough of them. Like I think it's the treasure hunter in me. But yeah, so I'll use the analogy of gold mining. And it's this argument around, do we chase revenue or do we fix efficiency and optimization and profitability? And I default to, you can't add revenue until you've got profitability right. You have to know how to yield profit from an amount of revenue before you add revenue. Otherwise, you're just continuing to be unoptimized at a larger scale. Unoptimized, I don't know if that's the correct word, but anyway. So yeah, so in these gold shows, generally it's like up in the Yukon, and the guys they'll do test holes to see how much gold there is in the ground, which prospecting, which is a phenomenal tip anyway. Like, you should be prospecting before you invest. But the way that every single miner approaches gold mining, they have to move like millions of metric tons of earth through these wash plants. And the very first thing they do is optimize that wash plant to catch every last speck of gold, because they're about to move 1 million metric tons of earth through a machine. And there's no point in going to all of that effort, all of that massive expense, when you're simply washing gold off of the end of the box, right? And so these guys will, before they do anything, they optimize and they get experts in and they test and they wash a certain amount of dirt, and then they test the tailings and they do gold tests. Is there still gold going off the end of this? And once they are fairly certain that they are set up to yield and save every single speck of gold, then they crank it. Then they're like, how much dirt can we put through this machine? But they know that they're not losing gold. And agencies need to adopt that mentality, right? It's everyone chases revenue. It's like, how much dirt can we move? How much dirt can we move? And it actually doesn't matter. What matters is how much gold did you yield at the end of the season, right? Like, at the end of the year, how much gold did you collect? And everyone on this call knows how hard it is running an agency. Everyone on this call knows how much work it is, how much stress, how much pressure, etc. And to be quite honest, it's not worth going through all of that unless you catch every single ounce of gold. So my fundamental belief is you have to optimize around minimizing stock loss. You have to 100% optimize around minimizing stock loss before you start loading up this machine. But once you've optimized, once you're efficient and you've got the measurement mechanisms, the technology, everything in place, and the behaviors, then go and win as much revenue as you can and make as much profit as you can. But just don't wash gold off the end of the machine. And Brett, the one thing is worth saying is, because this is important to guys, around understanding how to invest in this. So your stock loss, whatever that number is, the difference between your potential and your actual earnings at the end of the month, is pure unadulterated profit. And it is going to be significant. So if you look at, if using the gold mining analogy, if they're losing 30% of the gold over the end, that could be $1 million. They will not blink at spending $100,000 optimizing the plant. They will not blink, because they know that $100,000 that they spend on all of the tech, all of the experts to optimize, absolutely has a tenfold return into the business. And I think agency owners are too frugal or too cautious when it comes to investing in the knowledge and the data acquisition that is required to be able to optimize their efficiency and optimize their profitability. And it pays for itself tenfold over. It really does. But you have to want to know. You have to choose to not be ignorant about it.
Yeah. And I like this I love this analogy because it highlights something really important that I know I've seen in my 6 years working with agencies that maybe aren't as high on the maturity curve. And it's in the absence of having a system, a process to measure the efficiency of their dirt throughput or measure the efficiency of how well their agency is running. The only place to focus is on pumping more dirt. Or in the case of most agencies, the only place to focus is just on selling more revenue. That becomes the only way to grow and optimize the business, is just to sell more revenue, get more clients, keep the clients that you have, do anything you can to keep the clients that you have. But I think the point here is not all revenue should be created equal or treated equal. There's
Oh,
some
no,
revenue that's
absolutely.
really good revenue because you're taking a lot of gold from it. But then there's other revenue where you're pumping tons of dirt through your system, but you're not getting much gold at all.
Yeah,
How does,
there's
yeah,
so Stephanie Foster just posted in the comments, and I love this.
yeah,
famous Abraham Lincoln quote where he said, if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first four sharpening the axe. Right.
Yeah.
It's exactly, Stephanie, thank you for putting that in there. It is exactly that, right? Once you know how to make profit, just go wild on the revenue. Go unhinged on the revenue when you know how to make profit because that is optimized for it. But I've seen so many massive revenue agencies almost collapse under the weight of the revenue because they're not making enough profit. And profit is the health of the agency. It is your ability to invest in anything. It's your ability to hire the best people, to market yourselves, to pay. It's just like profit is everything. There's that famous saying that goes, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. And it couldn't be more true. It's cliched, but it's true.
I haven't heard
It
that.
is.
Yeah. It's
Okay, so there you
good
go. So
stuff.
yeah, but it is. But I love the idea of growing revenue. I love the idea of winning as much business as you can, but it comes after being profit optimized, not before.
I think there's another really interesting point that I've heard from you that instead of focusing on finding new clients, focused on optimizing the ones you have. Maybe give us a little bit more context on that.
I'll go a bit further, right? You absolutely should be optimizing your existing clients, but it's difficult conversations. It's going into a client and say, listen, we underscoped.
Yeah.
Sorry, we need to requote. Or going in and saying, hey, listen, back in 2021, we were super shy new agency and we gave you this discount and you're still on 2020 run rates and we need to up you to 2025 rates and it's going to hurt. But it's happening. It is all of the difficult conversations that we avoid. We feel the pain in our profit margin. So it really is just about going, you know what, I'm prioritizing profit and it may mean upsetting clients.
One quick
Right.
story and one last, and then one
Just
last
one quick
question.
thing. Yeah, yeah.
What's up?
One quick thing on this
Yeah.
is one of the benefits of chasing revenue going through this process is your ability, your strength in having this conversation with a client is directly related to your pipeline. If you have a lot of good opportunities in the pipeline, you have a lot of strength when you have a conversation with a client. Because if that client goes, no, I will not accept working at 2025 rates, you go, fantastic, we're going to replace you. So
Yeah.
again, it's not about growing revenue. I would rather, if you have two clients that are paying you $50,000 retainers each month, and one gives you $1,000 profit and the other one gives you $10,000 profit, I would rather swap them than add them. I don't want 100,000 and nine. I don't want 100,000 in fees and $9,000 profit. I'd rather have 50 in fees and and 11 and have 10. I would rather replace clients until across the board they're good clients and then build. You can't build on bad clients.
So true. And I think one story comes to mind is, and this isn't just, I don't think this is just true in smaller agencies that are looking to mature. I was consulting with an organization that had about 250 team members. They had been around for 20 plus years, and they were the agency of record for one of their customers for 10 years. And we asked them, we were like, hey, like, how do you currently do analysis to understand how profitable your different client relationships are? And they're like, you know what? We've never really done that. And we're like, all right, you probably have a gut feel that some of them aren't as profitable as others, right? And they're like, yeah, we have this one client that's been with us for 10 years and we've never renegotiated rates. So they've continued to pay their people more and more over time, but they weren't
Yeah.
willing to have that conversation. And they had no idea how much gold that dirt was actually providing to the business. And if you can do the math, margins can shrink pretty fast over a 10-year period. All right, one last question
And I can
before I
also
open it
tell
up.
you, yeah, I can also tell you that fundamentally you have a duty as an agency owner to not allow that to happen because you've put them in a position where they will not be able to accept a 10-year jump in rates and you cannot continue with it. You destroyed that relationship. That's not the client. You allowed that to happen and you've put them in a horrible position.
That's a great that yeah, to your point, it's not even a hard conversation after that long, it becomes an impossible conversation.
Yeah. And even if they go out to pitch and they select another agency at 2025 rates, it's not going to be you.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Last question before we up. So audience, start thinking about if you have any Q&A and maybe even start pumping them into the Q&A. But as the audience is thinking about their questions, Craig, like we have to ask, how do you think AI is going to impact the agency space? And are you bullish or a little bearish at this point?
I'm bullish. When you say impact, I believe it should have a positive impact. You have to qualify which side of the scale the impact is happening on. I'm quite bullish about it having a positive impact on the business. I'm also quite realistic about it. I like to talk down AI a little bit to just make it a little bit less hype and a little bit more manageable as far as a concept is concerned. The example I always use is going when Excel first came out and bookkeepers before Excel used to actually use books. Excel didn't kill bookkeepers. It made their jobs a lot easier. It made them more efficient. It made them more productive. But we didn't stop having bookkeepers because a computer could do it, right? Because a computer you could put sums into cells and it auto tabulate and auto calculate and stuff like that. It made the industry stronger. It made us more dependent and more aligned because it increased what we could do. And that's generally my attitude towards AI. I just think it's going to enable agencies to do significantly more, to add significantly more valuable to clients, to entrench ourselves more into clients. If we approach it positively and we embrace it and we see it as an opportunity far more than a threat, then I think we'll be good. But just don't be the bookkeeper who argued against Excel and oh, you can't trust computers. Don't be the bookkeeper who tried to keep physical ledgers going. Rather just go, you know what, like it's going to evolve and enhance our role, and it's going to enhance the value that we can offer to our clients if we accept and embrace it and utilize the power that it offers.
Well said. All right. So we've got about 7 minutes left. Just saw another question pop into the Q&A. Speaking about stock and efficiency, I'm wondering your thoughts on how a shortened work week could impact efficiency. Are we seeing data to suggest that employees with more efficiency at 30 hours per week versus 40 hours per week?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on whether you're paying them for a full week to only work 4 days. That'll have a negative impact because your costs go up. If you're able to justify higher value and higher returns from the lower amount of time, then you could probably charge a full week's worth of fees for 4 days work. If people were that much more efficient and they got a week's worth of work done in 4 days, then you should be fine. If you pay the employee for 4 days instead of 5, then your efficiency would probably remain the same as a percentage of sales. I don't know if the question frames it whichever way you're looking at that. I'm a big believer in agencies in not punishing efficiency. I believe that if an employee is efficient and they're able to complete tasks shorter, they should not be given more work. I think the opposite. I think if someone doesn't get through their work, I think they should be asked to stay until it's done type of thing, or asked to leave. But someone who's efficient should not be punished with more work because they very quickly realize that efficiency is bad, right? Like they don't get paid more for being efficient. And if they see inefficient people being rewarded by having work taken away, the whole thing slows down. So whatever systems you employ should be about rewarding efficiency and not punishing it.
Yeah. Something I would also add to that is you have to be really clear about your differentiation. And if you are saying that your team is that much more efficient, you either need to prove it internally or externally, depending on the conversations you're having. But any agency could say that. How do you actually demonstrate that to a customer who you're asking to pay for a 5-day work week versus maybe your competitors that are also bidding on that work that are offering the full 5 days of service? All right. And we got some more questions, Craig. We got 3 more. So from Catherine, how do you shift internal culture to actually share utilization targets with team members when there is a fear of culture becoming clock in and clock out or less value-driven delivery within the hours spent?
So one thing I want to challenge is, Catherine, I think if I'm reading that correctly, there's an assumption that clock in, clock out is bad. And I just want to dispel the notion that clock in and clock out is bad. Some of my most efficient employees ever, most effective employees ever clocked in and clocked out, right? In fact, one of our designers, Tanya, was the most demanded person on teams. Like client service would submit a brief and go, please put Tanya on it, please put Tanya on it. And I promise you, she clocked in and clocked out at the exact same time every single day. I think the constraint of clock in, clock out makes people more efficient. I think people who think that they can just work until 10 at night actually breeds inefficiency. often when I work with agencies that I coach, I challenge them on something. I go, if you ask every employee, you say to them, do you want more work? They'll all say no. If you say to your employees, do you want more responsibility? They'll almost all say yes. And within that, this thing of going, employees wanting more responsibility and them saying yes is true. Responsibility means access to data, access to knowledge, access to performance. They all want this and they thrive. And anyone who doesn't shouldn't be in the business. You can't do this without having people invested in it. And the way to get people invested in it, for my belief, is that you share the information with them and you allow them to interpret and analyze and suggest changes in behaviors and to raise issues and say to you, this client does this, and that's why I'm always over, etc. So I think employees tend to think that it's their problem, that they're at fault when there's utilization problems. And I can tell you, it's almost certainly never an employee's problem. It's always you either discounted, you underscoped, a client is over demanding, a client's behavior is bad. Very rarely an employee's problem. And the way agencies communicate, it seems to be that the employees live in fear that over delivery or low profit is their problem. When they realize it's not, they're very open with what you can do to fix it.
We're going to continue. I see three more questions, and I know we're getting toward the top of the hour. Craig, I don't know if you can stay and crank through these. I know that.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm happy to stay.
Cool.
No worries.
I know I can. If you do have to jump, but you have questions that pop up later, please scan the QR code, connect with Craig. If you're looking for a lower touch coach and guide and somebody who's going to help you become an independent operator and manager of your agency, Craig's an awesome resource. And if you're interested in talking more about Parallax, feel free to reach out to me. Jumping back to the questions. So I'm going to jump to the chat and then I'll go back to the Q&A. What is the ideal confirmed revenue percent needed to greenlight investments like a new hire or business development contractor? So how do you think about how did you think about when it was safe to hire new employees and take on additional costs to the business?
It changed. It's an important distinction here. Pre and post selling to WPP, it changed. So pre selling to WPP, we just hired people when the team told us that they were too busy to take on more clients. And post WPP, we hired based on percentages because your employees are going to lie to you. You can say to an employee, hey, do you have capacity for more work? And they'll be like, oh, no, I'm crazy. I can't take on more work. Meanwhile, they're at 60% capacity. They're doing 40% free work, stock loss. So they are at capacity, but they're not at capacity from a revenue perspective. So post WPP, we were required to go into detail on this. We were required to find out where all the issues were, et cetera. And everything that I've spoken about now, they embrace as a business. Obviously, they're good at what they do. And so post WPP, the rule that we had was 60% of your gross profit. So it can't be your revenue, it can't be your total billings. You'd have to take out cost of sales. If you spend money on paid media or venue hire, if you're a PR, anything that's not your money, take out. But gross profit is the total value of your fees that are earned. That's your money, look, in plain English. So 60% of your gross profit is your budget for human costs, whether it's employees or freelancers or whatever. You've got 60% is available to resource to deliver on the scopes that you've presented for those fees. So you can work that backwards. We used to do projections into the future for our revenue. We'd look at our pipeline and we'd go, we're expecting our revenue to grow by this much. And every growth in revenue obviously has 60% means more money for salaries. And we would know, oh, you know what, in 3 months' time, if we win that client, we will have X amount more budget for hiring, and we can resource accordingly within that budget. Pre-WPP, we just resourced, as I said, by thumb sucking and guesswork and asking people who has capacity, etc. And I promise you now, the amount of profit we made pre-WPP and post-WPP are polar opposites. Like before WPP, we made very small profit margins. And after WPP, we made the correct profit margins. It wasn't abusive, it wasn't wild, but we made really healthy profit as a WPP agency because of that.
That's pretty wild because you think about their strategy, and their strategy is probably to gobble up less mature agencies like yours and then help add some rigor to churn a profit. And it sounds like they did exactly that with y'all. Like they executed the playbook perfectly. All right, two
Well,
more, two more
they held us
questions.
to account. They held us to
Yeah.
account on having difficult on fixing the problems. Prior to that, we could just let it slide.
Yeah.
You just you know what? I don't want to challenge this client. We'd rather make less profit. That's okay. When when you don't own the business anymore, that's not your decision.
All right. The next one. Thank you for that question, Rebecca. Next question. What are your favorite tips for maximizing stock churn and high profitability while balancing a people-forward culture that keeps your people happy, content, and driven? And I think you've probably touched on different elements of this. So maybe if you had to summarize in one or two key takeaways, what's the best way to maintain culture while you're driving the business forward in an efficient way?
I go back to this. I think there's an assumption that that when you're referring to culture, you think it means not working your butt off and being highly valued and highly valuable. I think the best cultures in agencies are when people understand their value and want their value maximized, right? Like culture is not table tennis and people free soda fountains and that kind of stuff. High performing employees, the culture is around value. They want themselves to be valued. They want the business to maximize their returns because that's how they maximize their returns from the business. I would much rather build an agency where the culture, where everyone understands that they are valued, they are valuable, their time deserves to be paid for by clients correctly and fairly, not abused, not given away free, not disrespected and treated poorly. That's the culture you should be building. But trust me on this, employees don't like the idea of sitting around giggling all day, etc. The best employees want to work. They want to create amazing work, but they want to be paid well. They want the agency to be paid for their time.
Perfect. All right. Last one. What are your suggestions for, and thank you for that, Polly. What are your suggestions for business development and marketing and how it needs to be structured to scale and how you've seen agencies get stuck?
This is like three other webinars in one question. I, I could talk about this for days. If I could summarize it, in smaller agencies where people get stuck is the person generating the revenue is also involved in the execution of the work. If that happens, your revenue stalls immediately. I believe that the person who drives revenue should not be involved in the delivery at all, because if you have to, if when you win a client, you have to work harder. It's like a punishment, and you naturally self-sabotage. You just go, if we win this pitch, I have to work more weekends. You're going to stop revenue growth. So the first thing is to detach revenue growth people from execution people. That's absolutely critical. From a marketing and lead gen perspective, I think revenue is the wrong thing to focus on. I think revenue this is going to sound like I'm being petty, but revenue is a side effect. The actual action is lead gen. If you're getting a lot of really good leads and people who are interested in what, you don't have a revenue problem anymore. So the action, the focus is just going, how do we get leads? And at the heart, at the core to getting leads is solving the problem of how do I get potential clients to want to speak to me, because I know why I want to speak to them. They know why I want to speak to them. How do I get them to want to speak to me? What do I have that would make them interested in going, hey, Craig, can we set up a call? So I'm summarizing, Brett, sorry, I'm summarizing like just a massive, amazing, a really interesting topic into a few short lines. But if you can figure out how to get people to want to speak to you, you'll have a lot of leads. And if you have a lot of leads, you'll have a lot of revenue.
All right. We've milked this hour session for all it's worth, but for those of you that are still hanging out, thank you very much. I know it's been fun for me. Craig, any parting words for the group here?
Yeah, if you do want to make this a successful business, do everything you can to fight the urge to hide in ignorance. You want to know this stuff. And so do everything you can to understand and get as much detailed information as you can around your stock, around your profitability and where it goes. And the solutions to it will present themselves when you understand where it's going and what's causing the problems. So just embrace it and be excited about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Craig. Again, it's been fun.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for talking shop, and thank you everybody for joining. Have a good rest of the
Great.
day.
I appreciate your time as well. Thanks for hosting.
Appreciate it, Craig. All right.